Good morning. My name is Lily Sandberg. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm excited to be joining you again. And this time I am coming to you from Kansas City, Missouri. Last time I spoke, I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I have moved since then to complete my ministerial internships, which is very exciting. And I am so excited to be able to join you this morning. And we are talking about change. The thing that happens, whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not, change is the constant of life. And so this morning we are talking about standing on changing ground because it feels like the world is changing all the time in every way. Not just the pandemic, not just our politics, not just our body, not just our communities. It feels like everything is changing. And it's probably because it is. And sometimes that can be so exhausting because you just want a constant. I feel like I say that to myself all the time. Lord, just give me some consistency. I don't want any more change. I'm done. I am full up on change. Thank you very much. But that doesn't work. That change happens around us, and either we can jump on board or we can fight against it. And the thing that I am learning, and many of our teachers tell us, is that fighting against change is exhausting. And I think when we can sink into the change and learn that the only thing we can control is ourselves and work on that work, that is when change can be an asset. Change can be a benefit. Change can be exciting. But it doesn't always feel like that. That's the piece of our humanness that we as humans want consistency. We want to know what's happening next so that we can prepare. It's a survival tactic. And so in many ways, we are equipped to fight against change. But what our tools in Unity help us do is ground ourselves for when change happens. How do we show up? How do we find the consistency in it? How do we learn from the change? How do we get on board with the change? How do we embrace the change? And so we're going to go into some of that today, coming back to our tools, to our principles of unity in the midst of change as we stand on changing ground. And so one of the authors that I love and Unity loves so much, especially about talking in change, is Robert Brummett. Finding Yourself in Transition. If you don't have this book, it is an asset to your bookshelf, an asset to your library. And so his first chapter goes into the paradox of change. And so Robert Brummett says, in this present age of uncertainty, perhaps the only thing certain in life is that it will change. Change is an inevitable part of our human experience. This has been true for humans in every era and is especially true for us who live near the start of the 21st century. I would add, into the 21st century. Most of us who live today are witnessing and experiencing more change in a few years than our ancestors would likely have experienced in the course of their lifetime. These changes continue to occur at an ever-increasing rate. Indeed, it appears as if time itself has somehow sped up. Rapid changes are occurring not only in the world around us, but in the world within us. These changes are not just in technology or lifestyle, but are radical changes in the way that we perceive ourselves and our universe. Such changes are not about how we live, but about who we are as human beings. Our assumptions are about who we are and what we're related to in the world around us. Those are being challenged, if not shattered. So if you feel like the world is changing around you, it is. If you feel like you in the world are changing, you probably are. That statement from Robert Brummett about change being inevitable is true. I also think it is true that the world around us, at a magnitude that we have never seen and our humanness has never been equipped for, is moving faster than ever imagined. And I love the piece that he says about the world changing within us too. Those beliefs about what it means to be human, where we are situated in this world, how we are understanding the world around us, those are also changing, if not being shattered. that I know for many people in Unity, as we dive into the work, the actual like elbow grease work of spirituality, some of those pieces that we have held on about ourselves, about the world, about our history, those are challenged and shattered to make space for what's new, for what better serves us now. But that is hard. It is not easy to be able to say, I have held on to something for maybe my entire life, and I am being challenged in that and willing to do the work of, am I going to hold on to this old belief, which is our embedded theology when it is not challenged, and potentially make a change, which is deliberative theology. And that is the work that we are doing, is being able to challenge the old ways of thinking for us, as well as for our community and our world, and potentially shifting into something that is new. That is the essence of change right there. But it is not easy. And so I want to tell you a story. And it's a story that illuminates a lot of what it means to change. Mr. Roberts, a recently widowed man, liked routine. Since he had retired many years ago, he could choose exactly what he wanted to do with his time. And that pretty much looked the same every day. He had his needs met, and that was good enough for him. One day, a Monday, he was eating breakfast. It was the breakfast he ate every single day, and he was finishing a crossword when he heard a knock on his door. Mr. Roberts didn't receive many visitors, so slowly got up and walked to the door. Through the peephole, he could see a young man in an obnoxiously bright-colored t-shirt. He yelled, "I don't want any," trying to deter the visitor. The young man yelled back, "Mr. Roberts, would you like to change the world?" Without thinking, he laughed out loud. Why in the world would I want to change the world? My world is fine, Mr. Roberts thought to himself. He began to walk away when he heard another knock at the door. Knowing the young, zealous man might continue knocking until he got an answer, Mr. Roberts opened the door. "Mr. Roberts, do you want to change the world?" the young man asked again. No, I do not," said Mr. Roberts. The young man, a bit shocked, fumbled and said, "Well, change is about making different choices, a new choice. And I'm campaigning for a local school board district candidate who wants to change the world by changing our neighborhood first." The young man handed him a flyer and began to walk away. Mr. Roberts, a little confused, turned around, closed the door, and throws the flyer on the counter. Hogwash, he thought. No one will change the neighborhood. It's been the same for the last 40 years. Later that day, since it was a Monday, Mr. Roberts got into his car and went to the grocery store. As he pulled into the parking lot, he realized the normal spot that he used was taken. "Well, I always park there to be close to the door and close to the cart return, so I guess I'll just wait," Mr. Roberts said. He took a lap around the parking lot, waiting for the spot to be available. He took another lap around the parking lot, and another lap around the parking lot. After driving for around 15 minutes around the parking lot and seeing that no one had come to remove that car from his spot, he parked right next to that spot. He walked into the grocery store, he grabbed a cart and began to shop. He found apples, he found his bananas, he found his eggs, but he could not find the bread that he liked. After looking around for minutes on end, he frustratedly found a store employee and asked, "Where's the wheat bread in the blue bag?" The store employee, a bit puzzled, said, "Do you know what the brand is? Our bread company just rebranded, so the labels have changed, and nothing is colored blue anymore." "Well, why would they do that?" Mr. Roberts said, raising his voice. The employee, continuing to try to be helpful, said, "If you like wheat bread, here's the one I'd suggest," and handed Mr. Roberts a bag of bread. Mr. Roberts, a bit disgruntled, checked out, got back into his car, and driving home, drove by a large sign with the slogan, "Changing the world starts right here." It was for the same school board candidate that the young man was campaigning for this morning. Upset, some about the parking spot and some about the bread rebranding, Mr. Roberts decided to give this school board candidate a piece of his mind. Finding the flyer when he came home, he found the number on it and called. Ring, 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 answering machine. He left a message telling the candidate all about why changing the world and changing his neighborhood would be the worst idea they could possibly have, and hung up. Mr. Roberts didn't think much of that call again. He went right back into his routine. The same breakfast, the daily crossword, the house that hadn't changed since his wife died 8 years ago. He walked around the same block, wore the same clothes, watched the same shows. The following Monday, during his breakfast and crossword time, he heard a knock on the door. Oh God, not again, he thought to himself. Then he heard, Mr. Roberts, I'd like to talk about you and change. Oh God, not again. Another knock. He finally got up, and as he was walking to the door, he bellowed, I'm not interested in change. I'm fine. As he opened up the door, he saw the lady from the flyer and the sign, the school board candidate. She said, Mr. Roberts, I'm Susan. You left me a very passionate voicemail, so I wanted to see if we could talk about. Mr. Roberts cut her off and said, don't say change. I don't want to talk about change. I don't even want to think about change. I don't want to change. We don't need to change. Taking a deep breath, Susan said, I hear you. Change is hard. Beginning to get upset, Mr. Roberts said, what do you know about change? My entire life changed 8 years ago when my wife died, and I had no choice in it. Change only hurts people. That's when Susan understood. Mr. Roberts did not hate change. He hated the change that had happened to him when his wife had died. Little did Mr. Roberts know, but Susan actually knew Mr. Roberts' wife. They had worked together for many years. Not wanting to give up on the connection, Susan persisted and said, I'll make you a deal, Mr. Roberts. I'll give you my pitch about change, and when I'm done, I'll leave. Sounds good? He mumbled in agreement, just wanting her to leave. Susan said, I'm running for school board and asking for there to be change in our neighborhood, for our kids and for our future. The change that will happen may not directly impact you, but I'm hoping it will make each of our lives better in a good way, even just in a little bit. You see, Mr. Roberts, I'm younger than you. I have a different life experience than you. And I'm raising kids right now that are going through a really rough time with how it has been. Seeing my kids coming home from school feeling anxious, scared, and depressed is tough on my mom heart. So I decided I needed a change. And someone once told me, if you want change to happen, you have to be the one who does something about it. Mr. Roberts' eyes went wide. My wife used to say that. She said that all the time. Susan continued, I knew your wife. She was a colleague of mine for many years. She changed the company we worked for from the inside out, making space for me to grow and move up. She told me that phrase many years ago, and I hold it dear. That is why I'm running for school board and why my slogan is what it is. I don't want to change the neighborhood or the world just to scramble your life. I want to change the neighborhood and possibly the world to make it better for all of us, just as I think your wife would have wanted it to. Thank you for listening, Mr. Roberts. I appreciate your time. As Susan began to leave, Mr. Roberts said, what was that slogan again? Susan turned around and said, would you like to change the world? Mr. Roberts said, with a grin on his face, I'll consider it. And I think this story about Mr. Roberts and of Susan is a good one for a frame of how sometimes we see change as a barrier. That if I am Mr. Roberts and change happened to me when my wife passed, no wonder I don't like change. No wonder I'd keep the same routine every day. No wonder I'd keep the house the same. Because consistency is part of coping in that way for Mr. Roberts, I think. But just because Mr. Roberts' life feels like it is in routine, that is not an example of how the world may need to change outside of the walls that he is occupying. And I think so often we can see our change potentially being a barrier to other people's change. That what may work for us may not work for the other, and that is the complicated dichotomy of being a human in this world, but also trying to make a world that works for all. That is part of Unity's mission, is a world that works for all. But how do we do that when each of us has a personal change to make? How does that work when our world is changing so fast? How do we stand on changing ground? How do we not become Mr. Roberts so stuck in our ways, but being able to embrace the change that Susan is hoping for? A change not only for right now, but for our future. One of the ways that I know is being able to connect back in with our unity principles and beliefs. That the beautiful thing about the 5 basic unity principles is that they don't change. The wording may be a little different, but the sentiment is the same, that is what a principle is called. If you've ever taken a Reverend Dr. Paul Hasselbeck class, he goes on and on about principles are the unchanging truth. And so our unity principles are the same. And you're not supposed to pick favorite unity principles, but my favorite has always been our second unity principle about being inherently good at our core. That if we are made in the image and likeness of God, then we are inherently good, which directly combats other ways of Christian belief about original sin. And so one of the ways that I have been able to cope with change in my life is remembering that goodness within me, that Christ presence, that essence of the divine that is there regardless of what is happening on the outside, regardless of what is happening on the inside. That Christ presence is always there. And the beautiful thing about our principles is we can always find them in scripture. We can always find them if we are looking. And so when I open to Hebrews in our Bible, and I look at Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. And we know that Jesus Christ, the Christ essence that was in Jesus made manifest in him as our way shower, as our brother, as our example, is the same Christ essence that is alive and present within us always. Always. It doesn't matter how much change happens in the world out there. It doesn't matter how much change happens in our eternal world. It doesn't matter how our ideas of the world are challenged and shattered. The Christ essence that is within you has always been there, is there now, and will always be there. And that is the same for the people next to you. That is the same thing for the people in your families. That is the same thing in the people that challenge you. That is the same thing in Mr. Roberts. That is the same thing in Susan. That is the same thing in everyone. That the Christ presence is eternal and unchanging forever and is found within us. And that is one of the most surefire ways that we can stand on changing ground, is connecting back in with that truth. The truth of who we are when we shed all of the things that can change and come back to the unchanging presence of the Christ within. And it is hard and it is exhausting and it takes work to get there. And that is why we are in community doing this work together. And so I am so grateful to be able to share this with you today. Be well and do good.